Welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast, journeys of descending into the mysteries and rising from the roots. I am your host, Lisa Hillier, spiritual mentor and priestess. I have guided hundreds of women through my one-to-one mentorship, online courses, and Patreon portal into the mysteries within them to rise rooted into their sovereign selves. And today I have Madeline MacKinnon on the show with me for a second time. Madeline is a passionate nutritionist with 10 years of experience helping women to recover from debilitating hormone imbalances. To pursue her mission, Madeline found natural hormone healing because she believes women need a holistic day-to-day strategy to balance their hormone health and fertility without synthetic hormones or medications. She is known for her popular hormone balancing cooking classes she teaches live across Canada. In addition, she has supported women worldwide through her premier one-on-one online hormone healing coaching program and her hormone nutrition school. And today we go deep into hormone health and how to naturally balance your hormones, as well as Madeline's new cookbook, which I highly recommend every woman get. I've been sharing a little bit about my healing journey over the past couple months, and my hormones played a huge factor into my mental health. And so I highly recommend getting your hormones in check and listening to this powerful, powerful episode. And if you feel called to support me and the podcast, please like, share, send to anybody that you feel would benefit from this episode. And if you feel called to make a financial contribution, please consider joining the Patreon portal. Can't wait to dive into this episode with you. Okay, welcome, Madeline. And Madeline is my first returning guest, my second episode. So I'm excited for our conversation. Our last one was super powerful. So I'm excited to see where this one goes. And I know that you have a book coming out, which is really, really exciting, on balancing hormones, which is such an important conversation. So to start, can we start with what has been the journey to writing this book?
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Writing this book has been quite an amazing experience, because I think it was just about 1 year ago where the idea for the book came, and I've I worked with an editor for the book. So it's been just a really, really cool experience to just dive in to all of the information. I find that writing a book is so great to learn, because you're able to just really dive deep into the topic. And I learned so much just from writing the book about nutrition. I've definitely had certain things around nutrition that have changed from writing the book as well. When it comes to hormone balance, a lot of different topics that I didn't really think about as much, especially when it comes to menopause and the nutrition changes that need to happen then. So it's been a really cool learning, and also a really cool initiation of really thinking. Like I've always wanted to create a book, but I never thought I could actually do it and like write it in a specific time frame. So it's also just a more personal journey of being like, yes, you are capable of writing a book and putting it out into the world. So it's been really cool.
That's exciting. It's like a huge accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It
Commit
feels really
to
good.
it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know what comes up for you around menopause and hormonal health. I am in the thick of menopause right now.
Yeah.
It has not been an easy transition. And so I would love to know, how can you support yourself with food during menopause?
Yeah, food is so important, because what's happening in menopause is your hormones are dropping quite drastically, especially your estrogen and your progesterone. And usually menopause, like the transition period of perimenopause, can actually take a long time for women. It can be about a 10-year transition of the hormones fluctuating. So you're usually in perimenopause. So menopause is considered not having a period for 1 year. That's like officially menopause. And then perimenopause is that period leading up to it. So your hormones are fluctuating, and sometimes your estrogen can fluctuate to like extremes where it can go really high, double the amount of what it should be, and then go really low. And then it can put you on this roller coaster of hormones. And these drops in your hormones, these drops in your estrogen and your progesterone can first off really impact mental health, because your brain chemistry gets quite used to our hormones, and having that drop of hormones can definitely like influence, like cause more chances of depression, anxiety. And then we're also, that transition going through menopause too is bone health is a really important thing we need to discuss too, because bone density declines quite drastically when estrogen drops in menopause. And it turns out our bodies really relied on that for healthy bone formation, really relied on that estrogen. So your body in menopause, nutrition becomes almost more important, because when you're getting proper minerals in your diet, it can help prevent the bone loss that can happen in menopause. So I think bone health is really important. So those are some things we can talk about nutritionally. And adrenal health is something that a lot of people don't talk enough about, because your ovaries stop making estrogen and progesterone. They don't make it anymore, and then your adrenals will take over, and also you'll produce estrogen from fat tissue too. So, but your adrenals have to work a lot harder. So if you go into menopause with an adrenal issue, maybe you've been going through a lot of stress. Maybe, for example, a lot of the time what happens in that perimenopause transition is like a lot of things happen at once. So you might have like changes in relationships, having to take care of family members, like sick parents, kids growing up. There's so many different factors too. So we can definitely talk about adrenal health and bone health, and healthy estrogen too is really important.
Yeah. What does estrogen do for us? And what does progesterone do for us? Like, I think progesterone's the happy hormone. Is that true?
Progesterone is more of the calming hormone. So if your body's responding properly to progesterone, because there's actually some people that don't respond as well to progesterone, but progesterone should have a calming effect, and your body's going to produce it in that second half of your cycle. So progesterone is really important for countering the effects of estrogen. I'll talk about estrogen a little bit first too, because estrogen is really important for like making us feel like it's really important for skin health, like having like moisturized skin. Estrogen is a really key. Healthy hair. It's important for our heart health, our bone health. Just in general, it can really help moods too. So a lot of people tell me that they feel usually the best around ovulation, when you're having a regular menstrual cycle where you have that peak of estrogen. Usually it's going to help with moods and energy. It's a really important hormone, but it can get a bad rep when estrogen gets too high, or maybe if you don't make enough progesterone, estrogen can cause problems. So it can increase chances of fibroids, it can increase breast cysts, cause more PMS, cause more like lower energy, like mood swings. It can cause some issues, but progesterone is really important because it keeps that estrogen in check. So they have this balancing effect. So it will prevent like PMS, mood swings, fibroids, a lot of these things as well.
Beautiful. So with minerals, what minerals do you need for bone health? What foods are going to give those to you?
Totally. So the most important ones are calcium, but a lot of the time, way too much emphasis is given to calcium. Calcium is like the basics for bone health, and I do recommend people get forms of calcium in their diet. And you don't have to get it from dairy. You can get it from leafy greens. I really like getting it from like salmon and trout and sardines, actually from fish-based sources, or sesame seeds are an excellent source of calcium, especially in perimenopause and menopause, because they have some phytoestrogens in there. But magnesium is really important too. We really need magnesium for healthy bone health. And one thing too, not enough people talk about is vitamin K, in particular vitamin K2, which you can get from certain animal products. It's most and fermented foods. So a really high source of K2 is this fermented Japanese, I believe it's soybeans called natto. It's a really, really strong flavor. Some people find it really strong. But natto is a really good source, and different aged cheeses like Gouda, Brie. Gouda is known to be like the best option, and just getting more fermented foods in the diet, like fermented veggies and sauerkraut. That's really important. And sometimes I do recommend supplementing with these for people going through perimenopause, because the more minerals, the less the bone loss. So K2 is important. Zinc is another super important mineral. I really recommend zinc from seafood and red meat. It's more bioavailable that way. You can get it in pumpkin seeds and some plant foods, but getting it in those animal forms is really good for absorption. And then vitamin D is really, really important for bone health. So getting that vitamin D from the sun as much as you can in the summer months, and then possibly considering supplementation too, in really high quality forms in the winter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I started taking zinc. It was recommended, and I've just been taking it like in a supplement form. Is that okay?
Yeah, the key thing with zinc is to take it balanced with copper. So it should always have copper to balance, because if you take a lot of zinc, it can deplete your copper reserves, which are important for iron deficiencies in particular. So I like to take it in a form, like a formula. So there's certain ones I really like that have like vitamin. There's one that has magnesium, zinc, B6, a bit of copper, all mixed together. So It's nice to take things, but I do prefer to get them in food form, or mixing it up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always kind of the better way, isn't it? Is to get it with your diet. Does anything come up for you around being vegan and menopause? And can that be harmful? I do believe that part of why I maybe went into early menopause was because I was vegan for 6.5 years.
Yeah. The biggest issue around vegan diets is really the mineral deficiencies that can happen over time, especially these mineral deficiencies like zinc, being more bioavailable in animal forms, having proper iron, and bioavailable DHA from fish. I think is probably, I was mentioning one thing that I really learned from writing this book is the importance of omega-3. And I knew omega-3 was really important. But when I was looking at when I was writing the book, I would look at each hormone and look at the research on what nutrients are needed to support each hormone. And almost I'm pretty sure every single hormone, omega-3 was important. DHA was important for hormone production. So I think that's, I would say zinc, iron, and definitely not getting enough complete protein in the diet. But I really like a balanced approach with vegan diets too, because I think that you don't have to eat, especially in menopause, you don't have to eat meat every single day. It can actually be beneficial to eat plant-based food in menopause. So you don't have to have it every day, as long as you're having it frequently enough to get the nutrients in your diet. And so there also is a benefit of having all of more seeds and nuts and different leafy greens. So it's actually, I more recommend mostly someone consuming more meat and more animal products really around that fertility time. That's when you really want to concentrate having it. But if you've developed a deficiency from not consuming them, you might want to have more going through perimenopause. But it's just all about finding that balance of make sure you don't develop the deficiencies, but you can still eat a pretty plant-based diet, and it can be really beneficial for longevity. as well to have like more plant-based foods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It feels like it's building up those reserves of the
Yes,
minerals and for the adrenals and all that kind of stuff where
totally.
the
Yeah, and
animal.
I have a section in the book I talked about in my low estrogen chapter. So in the book, there's a chapter for different types of common hormone imbalances. So a low estrogen is kind of the menopause chapter, but I also talked about what you can do to prevent early menopause too, and prevent and help to support egg quality. And have a list of specific foods, and like seafood was the top recommendation on
Mm,
that list. There's research that having seafood can help prevent early menopause.
okay. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Good to know. Very
Mm-hmm.
good to know.
Yeah.
um, I feel like I'm having a lot of these conversations so the listeners can prevent maybe what I'm going through, can get their
Mm-hmm.
adrenals robust and all their levels up so that they're not having
Mm-hmm.
a challenging time going through
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah,
transition for sure.
definitely. Mm-hmm.
So do you want to just touch on how your book's laid out? So what a reader will experience, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the book starts off with an introduction to hormones and a quiz that the reader can do to determine what possible hormone imbalance they have. And the book has a chapter on the seven most common hormone imbalances I see and also I work with in my client practice. So you start off with a quiz to build awareness around what hormone imbalance you might have. So you can do those quiz, add up and tally everything up, and then figure out what hormone imbalance might you have. And I actually always encourage people too is that this quiz is to build awareness. And if you really want to know what hormone balance you have, you can test your hormones too. So I do have resources the reader can tap into to get proper hormone testing so they can know for sure what's going on. And then there's a chapter on nutrition foundations. So this is the chapter that's really specific for what I think everybody, no matter what hormone imbalance you have, should be doing to have that optimal hormone health. So it talks about how to format your meals and how to get the right amounts of fats and protein and carbs. One of my favorite sections too is on healthy fats and which fats you want to be cooking with, what types of heats to use to make sure your fat doesn't go rancid. So I have a really good chart there that I would love to make printable too one day that just gives you tips on getting that foundation of the fats and knowing how to
Mhm.
cook each one too. And then after that foundation chapter, then we go into the specifics. So we have a chapter on high estrogen and what foods you can be eating, food list, and then specific recipes for high estrogen. And then it goes to low progesterone, low estrogen, adrenals, how to support adrenal health, how to support high androgens, or for those people that have PCOS, which is so common. I think it's about 1 in 10 women have PCOS where their body is producing high androgens, which are considered male sex hormones. And they
Mm.
can cause like issues with ovulation, excess hair growth where you don't want it, weight gain, just like where it's like you're not changing anything, but you're still gaining weight. And then thyroid is another chapter too, and testosterone as well. I have a low testosterone chapter, so what you can do to boost your libido. And so that's how it's all laid out. And there's recipes in each chapter too. And one cool thing too is that you don't have even if you can still cook the food from each chapter, so you can still find recipes. They're all going to support hormone health, but the specific chapters are really for specific hormone imbalances. So maybe if you do have high estrogen, or if you are going through perimenopause, you can really emphasize cooking more of those recipes from the low estrogen chapter to help support bone health, reduce hot flashes. There's a lot of good info, so it's just a great resource for learning about nutrition to support certain hormones, and then getting recipes that you can make at home that are really nourishing and supportive to your hormones.
Mm. Are there elixirs in the book?
There are
Okay.
elixirs, a lot of elixirs actually. The elixirs, one thing that was really important to me too when I wrote the book, because I did a lot of market research and looking at what people were saying about other books that are out there, is I did want to make the recipes really accessible to people. So most of the recipes you can make with ingredients from your local grocery store. So you can just go in and get it. And then elixirs, which some of you probably, not too many people know what elixirs are, but they're warm herbal drinks. So they're more herbal drinks that are sweetened to taste good. So there's we make a adrenal tonic latte that has herbs, tastes similar to coffee, but it has things like reishi mushroom and really balancing herbs for the adrenals. We have a chai for supporting thyroid that has ashwagandha. So those are a bit more of those fancy ingredients that I would say. So I did add some of those in for those that want to go deeper and want to get those ingredients. And then there's just really good, nourishing, dinner and lunch recipes with ingredients you can get in your local supermarket.
Yeah. What are some ways that you can support your adrenals or pump up your adrenals so there's a big reserve there?
Definitely. Yeah. So adrenals, of course, the adrenal, they can get depleted by stress. Is usually the most common issue. And the thing that I see in my practice with adrenals is because your adrenals produce cortisol, which is a really important hormone that is what spikes in the morning to wake you up, and then it goes down, or especially at the end of the day, right when you're going to sleep. So the cortisol, usually what people have issues with is a cortisol imbalance, where they're either producing too much and they're in really high cortisol stage, or they're producing not enough cortisol, which is going to cause really low energy. Or they can get into issues where you produce too much, or you produce not enough cortisol in the morning and too much at night. So those are the things that I see usually when I'm running hormone tests. But usually you could know that you have an adrenal issue if you're feeling really low energy, feeling more easily stressed, so more easily overwhelmed than usual. So maybe you've been through a time of stress, something happens like your job or personal life, and just going through that time of stress, coming out of it, if you notice that things are starting to stress you more, or you're just feeling really fatigued through the day, brain fog, problems losing weight, especially around the midsection, those are some signs of cortisol issues. But in general, I think so many of us need cortisol and adrenal support in our culture just because of how life is. But what you can do to support your adrenals, number one, is eat regular meals throughout the day. It's actually, I'm someone where I'm all about foundations first. Let's figure out what the biggest needle movers are. So what I found actually works the best for my clients is make sure you're eating breakfast. Such a simple thing, but so many people don't do it. But make sure you're eating breakfast, especially something with protein. I would prioritize something with protein first. And that can be some sort of protein powder, if a smoothie, if you prefer, but having ideally just something that's very grounding, that will help stabilize your blood sugar first thing in the morning. Because I find, for me personally, kind of if I don't have breakfast, I'll notice that I just feel more easily stressed throughout the day. And a lot of my clients find that too. And this is an important tip too for anxiety, for anyone that's struggling with anxiety. It's so simple, because usually some people feel more anxious, they want to do the opposite, but just really prioritizing fat, protein, carb, having a really solid meal first thing at breakfast, and then lunch, and eating 3 really nourishing meals per day, because it will remind your body. It's almost like feeding your body well will remind your body that will make your body feel less stressed, because if you're in a stress state and you're not eating regular meals, your body's very ancient primal response might start to think that you're there's threat of famine, or there's threat of not as much food, and that can cause cortisol dysregulations. So feed yourself well throughout the day. Don't start the day and just have coffee. That's a recipe for just more anxiety, more stress. So that's the foundation. And also another really simple thing that I think is so important is get sunlight, because your adrenal rhythm is really synced up with your circadian rhythm, like of the rhythm of the sun, of how your body knows when it's awake and when it's sleeping. They're all connected. So proper light exposure can also be incredibly healing to adrenals, because you want to mimic what our ancestors had more time outside, weren't on the computer as much. It would just, have you ever had that experience where you've gone camping and had like the most amazing sleep?
Yes. Yeah.
Really like deep
Fresh air.
sleep.
Yeah.
But like
so good.
fresh air, it feels so different, but that's actually what it's supposed to be. Like that's how we're supposed to be sleeping. Just that really, because the cooler temperature is really good, of course, for sleep too, but just getting natural light if you're outside, what that's going to do is it's going to help regulate your cortisol levels. So it's going to just make, if your cortisol is a bit low, it will help naturally boost it in the morning. And then as you go towards your day, at the end of the day, avoid bright light, like avoid screens. Even if you can install like red light bulbs to put on in your home and just use those. Red light glasses. I have my right leg. I think I have them here. Maybe, yeah, like I have these. I'm sure for those that are listening, I'm putting on my red light glasses for some protection, because the cool thing is our ancestors would actually have had exposure to red light from the fire. That would be their only light. So fire lights being around the fire. So you can have that red light is fine. And they've done research on it. And when you have that red light exposure, you'll get more melatonin at night, and it should prevent that cortisol from being too high at night. So really healing light exposure. So biggest tip is in the morning, especially as soon as you can in the morning, sometime before noon, but the earlier the better, get outside. I'd for a walk, even 15-30 minutes, that's great. And then before bed, just avoid the scroll on the phone. Really simple thing. It's free, really effective. So those are the two basics. And I really think that if most people did this, they would feel so much better. And this is all beyond just regular stress management. Of course, we want to work on managing stress, but sometimes stressful times are out of our control. But the other thing is adaptogens. So using specific herbs to support your nervous system and support your adrenals. And that's where like the elixirs come in hand, like adding reishi mushroom into an elixir, or ashwagandha, or just taking a supplement can be helpful with those adaptogenic herbs too, but having specific ones at the right time. And when I'm working with clients, I'm very, very specific about what herbs they should use and what time they should take the herbs based on their hormone test results. So if I see I have a client that her cortisol is just spiking at night, I'll have like specific cortisol calming herbs that she does before bed. And sometimes my clients too need more herbs for supporting their nervous system, like nervine herbs. And if they've nervous system has been fried as well, like some more anxiety, then things like passion flower is really like nourishing, or milky oat is a really cool herb. It's a neurotropic restorative that can really help restore your nervous system over time. So working with herbs can be really, really effective as well.
I've been taking milky oat, and that's been really supportive.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love tinctures. That's my go-to. Do cold plunges do anything for hormone health? Do you know cold plunges?
Well, you would actually, so if you are in a very sensitive space with adrenals, so if you're feeling adrenally exhausted, if you're feeling tired, you feel like your system is really needing some care, I don't recommend cold plunges, because you want things that are more like nourishing. Cold plunges are great over time, like as you're healing, because they can help your body. It provides that good stress to allow your body to adapt, but it's like kind of this spectrum of healing. So for example, for adrenal healing, I always recommend people be careful with certain forms of exercise. So for example, if you're somebody that exercises and does like a really heavy HIIT workout or a hike, and you do your exercise and you feel like you've been hit by a bus afterwards, feeling totally exhausted, I always recommend staying away from those really intense workouts. So always listening to your body. So for somebody that is in that state of adrenal issues where they're feeling really fatigued from exercise, I don't recommend cold plunges because they probably are in that state where they need more like nourishment. So like, warm, like less stress on their body essentially, so their body can heal. But then at that point, if you're feeling, if you're building up your resiliency over time, then cold plunges can be helpful too.
Okay. Yeah. I was doing cold plunges and now I have a cold, but
Oh,
they felt amazing. They felt really good and they helped my sleep actually.
Yeah.
But I think it was too much on my system.
Totally. I think that it just depends. Like one actually thing that is helpful too is just like getting cold, like under the armpits, like when you're showering, as too, like just that's a lymph nodes to help flush everything out. So that's something to start with too. But it's just really about listening to the body. I think as people heal from adrenal issues, and they become a lot more sensitive to how their body feels too, because, a lot of people in the past, like myself included, have been in more states of like getting to the adrenal fatigue, like lots of states of stress. Sometimes you might not notice because you're so used to stress, but as your body starts to heal and those sensitivities develop, then usually can feel very in tune of like, is this good or is this not good for my body over time?
Yeah. Do you want to speak to what the endocrine disruptors are?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a section at the end of my book on avoiding endocrine disruptors, because endocrine disruptors are chemicals from our environment that can really drastically impact our hormone health. So many of us are exposed to really, really high levels of them, and they can act like estrogen in our bodies, unfortunately, and our bodies can actually take these endocrine disruptors in and put them in our estrogen receptors, and they can negatively impact us. So I really believe that a lot of hormone issues are from the exposure to endocrine disruptors over time. And we can be exposed to them through our skincare. So a lot of skincare can be an issue, like anything. I have a whole list here that I will pull up, but I have a whole guide to avoiding endocrine disruptors too, that anyone that purchased the book can get access to. But like skincare, pesticides, herbicides, things that are like in our food, in our skincare, and in our cleaning products are some of the biggest issues with endocrine disruptors as well, that we really need to be aware of too, because we can eat well, we can do all of this good stuff, but if we're not actually avoiding some of these things in our environment, then we can still run into issues too. So I did add that in because I think it's just one of those really, really key important aspects.
Yeah.
I have a list here that I can go through as well. Yeah. Have you, so essentially it's like, you really want to be aware of, first off, like probably one thing that most people don't know about enough is I'll tell the reader actually some really simple things you can do to reduce your exposure to endocrine disruptors. And actually one of the most simple things is like making sure your house is vacuumed.
Wow.
Like actually having because dust can have that concentration of those endocrine disruptors, like just research. So just know that like when you're like vacuuming your house, like and getting rid of that dust, like getting rid of it under kids' beds and just in that area, areas of your house, like and just making sure you're breathing clean air. It's really, really key to be avoiding those things. So that's one thing.
Are there any other big ones that people wouldn't think about?
Oh, yeah, some other big ones, like actually being aware of having like there's certain rugs, like the rugs that are like the washable rugs. Those
Mm,
things can actually be an issue as well. So like there's a lot of, I think it's really important to actually be um aware of actually like when you're buying like home products. So like there's a lot of like advertisements for these like washable rugs on Instagram right now. And I think it's important to actually contact those companies and like make sure that they don't have those chemicals in them.
mm,
That's another thing that's really important. And then also food. Like I think the main thing is like being aware of what you should get organic and what you shouldn't get as organic. I think like really paying attention to the clean 15 and dirty dozen list. If you look it up, I believe it's by the Environmental Working Group puts it out, but just being aware of like certain foods like potatoes, spinach, I believe tomatoes are on that list, and even kale.
mm.
They have a list of the most heavily sprayed crops that I think are really, really important to avoid. So like, just being aware of like finding those foods, like just having that list available. Because if you're like, I did a video the other day on spinach and how so many people like, we were told spinach is healthy, it's good to add greens, and then people will add spinach to their smoothies every single day, like have 2 handfuls of spinach. But spinach is one of the most heavily sprayed crops. So you need
Mm.
to be aware of those things too, of just like what are those, like what's on the list too. Um, and then, do you know what? Actually, I think this is probably the one thing that so many people still do is like using like fragrance, like those
Mm.
fragrances in their home, like those
Yeah.
plug-in fragrances. I can't believe how many people still use them. And it's really disturbing because a lot of people use them with kids at home too. And like I think that actually for young girls, young boys, avoiding these like endocrine disrupting chemicals too, like anything with a fragrance in it, can be very, very disruptive to the body and like impact the immune response. So I really think avoiding like those products like as much as possible, like any sort of sprays and fragrances, just avoid those things
Yeah.
100%. Like we just moved into a new house, and I think our old owners like wanted to be so nice, and they plugged in some sort of scent for us. And I think they moved out 2 weeks before we moved in, and they had it plugged in for 2 weeks. And I
Mm.
found it there, and like it takes a while. It's still been like over a month, and I still smell it in the home. And I think we really need to be aware of, like, especially for kids, as well, like with developing reproductive systems, we should be really conscious not to expose ourselves to these things for sure.
Yeah. I find it
Mhm.
interesting with garbage bags. Most of the garbage bags now
Yes.
are scented
Mhm.
with Febreze, and it's
I
so
know.
gross.
I almost flipped out the other day because I bought compost bags and
Mm.
they had them scented. And I was like, why would you send a compost bag? It's going
Yeah.
into the landfill. Because I just had no idea that would be a thing. So it just, yeah, drives me a bit crazy.
Yeah.
How, and yeah, there was a time when I was trying to look for a garbage bag, and I couldn't find one that wasn't scented. It was so
Yeah.
weird.
So
And like,
crazy.
and it's usually, and then you find the one that's like the no name, actually the one that's cheap, like somewhere hidden on the shelf. But that's a good point too. Just those garbage bags.
Yeah. Don't get the
Mhm.
Febreze
Oh,
scented ones.
and also one thing, menstrual products actually are another big one too. So menstrual products, like being, and some of them are scented, like those ones,
Mm.
but I think menstrual products are a huge one too, because your skin, like think about like the skin in those areas, the tissue, it's very sensitive. There's less layers of skin. It's very like sensitive, absorbent tissue there. And it's like right where our reproductive organs are, very close to our ovaries. Putting on those products, I think, are really, really, really horrible too when it comes to hormone health, because there's a lot of like bleach, a lot of toxins, there's a lot of endocrine disruptors in menstrual products, which I also just don't understand. So I really recommend prioritizing like organic, if you're going to, with the disposable, like organic pads, or looking at reusable cotton pads. But it even came out recently that the period underwear by the brand Thinks, it came out that had endocrine disruptors. They had endocrine disruptors in it. So you have to be really careful with what you're using. But I like organic cotton, like either reusable or disposable. I 100% recommend. And it's also amazing how hard it is to find them too. Like for me, sometimes I'll drive across the city to get them, and it's not very accessible. Like I did see some just in the regular supermarket the other day, but they had tampons but not pads. So I could go off on this for a long time. You just got me started, Lisa. Yeah, but those ones I would say it's like, vacuum your home. Be aware of washable rugs, like because they put the certain chemicals that they put on them to be washable can actually be quite endocrine disruptive. Fragrances and menstrual products, and then just heavily sprayed certain crops, like look up the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. So that's why I did at the end of the book have resources on avoiding endocrine disruptors, and then I do have a guide that people can sign up for too, and I can provide that to you as well, so we can put that in the show notes as well for people. But I have a guide that has a lot of tips on recommended products and what you should be looking for as well.
Okay, beautiful. That sounds amazing. Do you want to speak to just weight loss and how most people change their diet for weight loss, and that's kind of the focus and what is actually important?
Totally. Yeah, it's really funny because a lot of the time when somebody meets me for the first time, just in the regular world, and I say, they're like, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm a nutritionist. They always assume I help people with weight loss. They're like, oh, can you help my sister? I'm going to give you her email. They just assume that's what you do when you think of nutrition and weight loss. And one thing I really want to do, and I talk about in the book, is changing that conversation around just thinking of nutrition and weight loss, and thinking about, and I think when a lot of women want weight loss, I think what it comes down to is I think more women should just put their focus in nutrition for hormone balance, because there's so many more reasons to be eating for hormone balance, because it's like nutrition. Like when your hormones are balanced, you are going to feel more energy, you're going to have a better sex drive, you are going to just feel, you're going to have less PMS symptoms, you're going to have a more healthy metabolism and be able to eat a nourishing amount of food, and your metabolic health is going to improve, your sleep is going to improve. I just think way more benefits when it comes to hormone health. So I want to change that conversation, and let's talk about what can you eat for healthy hormone function over time than just focusing on weight loss, because those people that put their emphasis in just nutrition for weight loss, it often backfires. Often they end up gaining back the weight. And then if you're always dieting, always in these calorie restrictions over time, it's really, really challenging for hormone health too, because you need nutrients. Your ovaries need certain nutrients like zinc. You might not be getting enough, and being in a calorie deficit stresses the adrenals, elevates cortisol, and it can impact estrogen and progesterone over time. So I'm just all about let's change that conversation. And I think the conversation is changing for sure. But it's still not really out in the mainstream too much. And what I'm wanting to do from this book is I do just show people that there is research on all the different hormones and how food and nutrients impact every single hormone. There's a ton of research, and a ton of people's personal experience. So let's change that conversation.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a big one. It's not all about weight loss. Like hormone health
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
key.
Yeah.
Yeah, to your overall health for sure. When is your book available?
So it's coming out March 28th. So
Oh, wow,
it's
that's soon.
available right away, very soon. And you can get it. You can get it on Amazon in most countries. You can get it from like major book retailers like and Indigo chapters in Canada, Barnes and Noble in the US, and there's a bunch of other online retailers too so it's it's people have ordered it from all over Europe and in Australia, so it's like available worldwide.
Oh, that's exciting. That's really
Mhm.
exciting. Is there anything that you want to add to this conversation before we close?
Yeah, I think this has been a great conversation. I love talking about all of this topic. I would definitely just say that definitely if you're not feeling well, if you're not feeling like yourself, if you're having issues related to your cycle and fatigue, low energy, definitely look into your hormones because it can be one of the main reasons. And it's so amazing to see the changes that can happen in our lives. Like I have clients that tell me that their periods were so bad that they were having to consult their calendars around when they should be able to go on vacation, so they don't book vacations when they have their periods. And that's been able to be solved after addressing their hormones and changing their diet. And it's just amazing like how much that your hormones can influence your quality of life. So I definitely think it's so worth pursuing
Yeah.
overall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I second that. I put mine on the back burner. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's definitely important to get
Yeah.
it regularly checked for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. What's been your biggest lesson over this past year writing the book?
Mm. I've just been, I think one of my biggest lessons is like knowing that we're capable of so much when we have like when we have just like one focus to do. I've really learned about like managing my brain because I'm more of an ADHD type brain. So it's been really interesting to see like how when you have a deadline and you have something to focus on, how much you can get done. Um, that's been a really big thing of like really learning how to monitor that like brain energy and take care of my brain and really nourish and understand myself deeper on that level. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, it'll be in the show notes where everybody can reach out to you
Yes.
and order the book and all of that magic. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing with the podcast.
Thank you so much for joining me for an episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast. Please like, share, download, subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. And I will see you next week for another episode on the Phoenix Rising podcast. Sending so much love.